Like basically, it's a failure of management if people have to like burn themselves out to make something. There's absolutely no good reason that great art can't be achieved and have a good work-life balance.
What does it really take to become successful as a writer or artist? There are a lot of destructive myths out there about what a creative career is supposed to look like. We're told we shouldn't care about worldly success or money. We're told that if we're good enough, everything would magically fall into place. That's a lie, and it keeps us struggling, baffled, and hungry for any shred of information that might shed light on how to keep making the work we love. That's why get any two artists or writers or any creatives really together in a room, and it's a foregone conclusion that the conversation will turn to money and the nitty-gritty reality of being a professional creative. I'm cartoonist and creative business coach Jessica Abel. In my own life, those studio visit back-channel conversations with other artists where we share our insights and hacks, anxieties and red flags have been critical to any success I've achieved. And now I'm bringing that conversation to you. This is The Autonomous Creative. My guest today, Tomm Moore, is the award-winning animator and director of films and TV, including Wolfwalkers, Song of the Sea, Secret of Kells, and Puffin Rock. I met Tomm back in 2015 when I traveled with my family to Ireland, and he was kind enough to invite us to spend an afternoon at the Cartoon Saloon, the animation studio that he co-founded in Kilkenny, Ireland. Tomm's films draw on a deep well of Irish culture, folktales, and art, and that focus on deep roots seems so aligned with Tomm's choice to locate the company in Kilkenny, where he grew up. Kilkenny is a small city. It's not the most likely place to find an Academy Award-nominated studio known for mold-breaking visual style, combined with deep commitment to traditional 2D animation techniques. But visiting the studio and meeting some of the team, I was so impressed with the progressive and inclusive work culture, and I couldn't help but feel that this animation studio had the power to totally transform the lives of the people who work there and the people in the town. And of course, the lives of those millions who love the films. I was so excited to get to talk to Tomm about his path from Kilkenny teen to one of the most highly respected animators in the world, who also runs his own studio. I'll bring you the inside story right after this. This episode of The Autonomous Creative is brought to you by the Creative Engine. I talk to working creative people all the time, both on the show and in our membership, the Autonomous Creative Collective, and one of the biggest challenges they struggle with is procrastination. To most people, it feels like it's just a permanent character flaw, like they were born that way and doomed to suffer. But that's just absolutely untrue. Art is hard, yes, and we will all feel resistance to using that much cognitive energy on anything. But procrastination typically stems from specific root causes that are totally fixable. If your creative work is essential to you and who you are and your life, yet you still struggle with procrastination, and it just feels like this is crazy, I want to invite you to check out the free Creative Engine Masterclass. This class will help you overcome your resistance and put your priorities first before you're derailed by everything else. The Creative Engine is a complete, simple, straightforward, and powerful framework that will help you pinpoint where your creative process breaks down and highlight exactly how to fix it. In it, you'll master the 4 essential phases of the creative process you need to produce awesome work reliably. And you're probably skipping at least 1, possibly 2. You'll learn how to predict and avoid the pitfalls that derail you time and time again. And you'll overcome self-sabotage, take back control, and keep moving even when things get really challenging. This class is totally free, and you will get immediate, deep clarity into what makes your creative life tick. So stop procrastinating and start finishing your most important creative projects by harnessing the power of your own creative engine at jessicaabel.com/engine. That's JESSICAABEL.com/engine. Now let's start the show. Tomm, welcome.
Thanks. I'm blushing. What an introduction. Thank you so much. I've been a fan of your work and Matt's work and stuff. So when you came to visit the studio, it was exciting for me too. I always had a sort of couple of parallel things in my head that I'd like to have done with my life. And one of them was make the kind of comic books that you would make.
Well, I'm both sad and happy that you chose not to take that life because
there's still time.
I would love to have seen those comics, but
yeah, who knows? There might still be time.
Yeah, I think there's time for a few other little side projects on you in your future. So I wanted to just start off with just kind of setting the scene and telling and getting to know a little bit about what your work life is like normally. And I know it probably goes through seasons. There's different because there's different stages of production and things like that. And I think right now you're kind of in the developmental stage of whatever's next. But can you tell us a little bit about what that's like, maybe during production and then during a more in between period like now? Or maybe
Yeah,
I'm wrong.
no, this is the first time in 22 years that I've taken any kind of a break. I'm just working 2 days a week, supporting the new directors and from afar. I'm in Paris studying life drawing and urban sketching in the Beaux-Arts and mentoring in the Gobelin School. And it's something I promised myself for years and only finally got to now because COVID delayed it even after we finished Wolfwalkers. So my work now is very, very different. I'm just settling in. I'm only here 2 weeks in the Irish Cultural Centre in Paris. But for the past 22 years, since I graduated, or 21 years or whatever it is, it's been a kind of cycle, as you say, of development, fundraising, writing, storyboarding, then into full production, usually for about 24 months, and then back into a cycle. So, I mean, overall, I made 3 feature films in that time, and then founded the company and kind of oversaw a load of other bits and pieces that other people directed. But in terms of the stuff I directed myself, I was usually somewhere in that wheel of development or production, post-production or promotion. And I always said I was a bit like a chain smoker, that I had to light the next one off the butt of the previous one. So usually while I was deep in production and fed up with all the mistakes I'd made, I had the next one in development, so I could go, well, okay, I'm going to put everything I'm learning onto the next one. So this is the first time I've consciously stopped after 3 features, which isn't a lot.
Amazing.
It's not a lot of hours of animation, but it's a lot of years, you know.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's amazing to have it's, the amount of care and love and just people hours that go into making a film like this is just intense, and the results have so much impact all around. So it's obviously worth it. But to be able to take a break like that, and so,
I'm very lucky. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. So you're at the Irish Cultural Centre in Paris on, what's the name of the street? Do tell.
Rue de Irlandais. Since the time of Napoleon, this is where the Irish have hung out, and much whiskey has been drank in the honour of all our forebears while I've been here. But yeah, it's a fantastic spot. It's a beautiful old building that used to be, I think, a seminary for Irish priests, and then was one of the Irish colleges whenever the good old English stopped us having any Catholicism. They kind of sent all the priests here to train, and it was like a little centre of knowledge. And then it became a cultural centre at some point over the last 100 years. It's a really wonderful place where, like, I'm hanging out with people that are from completely different disciplines. The only thing we have in common is we're Irish. There's a guy writing an opera. There's a chap writing a novel. There's, people doing all sorts of things. So it's a really lovely moment for cross-pollination and a little bit of whiskey drinking.
That's what I love about the Autonomous Creative Collective, is how diverse everybody's things are.
What I love
it's all
about
the same concerns, creative concerns, just go across the board. So, but to get back to when you're not in this lovely lacuna between projects, what does your workday look like? I mean, is it like up at dawn, slaving away over the drawing table? Is it in meetings? Like, what? I know it varies, but just give us a little taste.
That's a tough one. Okay, so at peak production, I'd often be waking up early, worried about what had to be dealt with that day. I'd have a team of between 30 and 40 in Kilkenny, usually 2 or 3 co-production partners to touch base with, either in Luxembourg, France, sometimes Denmark or Belgium. So all our projects,
meaning other studios
we co-produce.
Working.
Yeah. So like if say there's 200 people working on the movie, that might be the key kind of like design decisions and the main writing and the main animation decisions are made in Kilkenny, and then we share the work with our co-production partners. So my day is often more about emotional intelligence and drawing over other people's drawings than drawing for myself when I'm in production. And then it's all over all of a sudden, and then I'm into another phase, which might be flying around promoting it, or as Wolfwalkers proved, I could do it all from my spare room in Kilkenny, which was nice in some ways, and everything was done by Zoom. But yeah, so like those are the 3 phases. I'd say development is the most nerve-wracking and also the nicest, because I'm drawing the most and writing and designing characters with my collaborators, writing scripts with my collaborators like Will Collins or Fabrice Wilkowski, storyboarding, all that stuff is really fun and juicy and creative. And that goes on for as long as it takes to get the story right or to get the finance raised or both or whichever comes first. And then that intense up at the crack of dawn into late at night every night for about 24 months is the kind of the grind of production. Because usually once the story's cracked and the finance is raised, you're committed to a date to get it done by, and your partners will have, committed their studio's resources for a certain amount of time. So you're really against the clock and you're really trying to do the best you can within that little chunk of time. And it's really surreal because it's like, it feels so hard to get to that phase. And then you're like, yes, we raised the finance. Oh no, now we have to make the movie. So that's the real, to be honest with you, I haven't dealt with that phase the best over my career. I don't think I was taught enough about the emotional intelligence needed and the self-reflection needed during that period. So I'm pretty sure I burnt out on each movie at a different point.
You mean in the self-management of sort of the amount that you're pouring into the process and the intense communication with the people, all those kinds of things?
Yeah, and like Wolfwalkers was much more collaborative, but even then I still liked to do a lot myself in a maybe a bit controlly way. So that was often the work that was done at 6 a.m. or whatever.
Mm-hmm. And then they come in and they see a bunch of stuff on their desk and they go, Tom, what's up?
Something like that. Something like that, yeah.
So your role in that period, and throughout it, but in particular in that period, is that as director, right? And so I'm curious what that means, because obviously you like to get your hands literally dirty, actually doing stuff.
Yeah.
But are there also kind of managerial roles, or is there somebody else who's handling that part?
Yeah, see, I have not directed or co-directed anything that I wasn't also the producer of. And that was a very conscious decision of mine because I saw friends who kind of had their vision compromised by producers meddling or whatever. So there's a huge part of my job, which is a studio owner and co-producer, so I'm answering to financiers and I'm talking with production managers, I'm talking with line producers about the problems of the day. And there's always a fire to fight. So there's a good bit of that in there too. Usually lunchtimes are given over to meetings with my partners, Nora and Paul, and Jerry Sheeran, our managing director. And that's when we kind of download where we're at. And sometimes Nora's in another stage of production in one of her films. So sometimes there's more directors in the studio now. So yeah, sometimes it's just like, what's going on? And then straight back into the fire of production again after lunch.
Wow. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about how you learned to run this as a business. I'm sure it was as you were going, but I mean, where have you reached out for resources? What were big sort of turning points for you thinking about this as, that it wasn't just making the film, but there's this whole structure that has to go around it?
Yeah, that was the hardest thing. That's not what we were trained for in Ballyfermot. Like I was kind of trained to be an animator in someone else's studio, probably Don Bluth's studio or whoever set up the course, And so when we set up our own studio, we had to learn all the other stuff ourselves. But it's a little bit like, that Wallace and Gromit cartoon where they're going along on the train and putting the track down in front of the train as the train is going down the track. And we crashed a fair few times. We were really lucky. I think part of being in Kilkenny allowed us to crash and pick up the pieces and go forward again. Certainly after Secret of Kells and Skunk Fu, our first TV show, we really hit a wall and we had to borrow money from family and friends and things to keep things going. And then from that lesson, we kind of learned that we needed that business savvy outside of the main group. Now, we did have another partner, Ross Murray, who was focused on the business side. But again, what happened was Ross immigrated to France, and that gave an opportunity for us to hire a managing director. So we actually hired Jerry Sheeran about 8 or 9 years ago to become our managing director. And he'd actually been the MD of the Sultan Bluth studio in Dublin, which was kind of the studio that made me believe it was possible to be an animator in Ireland. It was a big American studio set up in the 80s, and it made things like American Tail and Land Before Time. Depends how old your audience are, they might know these movies. But for me, they were like the cartoons of my childhood, and the fact they were being made in Dublin was mind-blowing. So when we first set up Cartoon Saloon, we asked a lot of advice off Jerry, who at the time was running his own studio in Dublin. And then by the time we were ready to hire a managing director about 9 years ago, I guess, Jerry had become available, and that has really been the turning point in the business in terms of us thinking about it in a very different way. Prior to that, I always joke it was like the crazy artists from art school just trying to kind of make a living doing what they love to do. And we're still so lucky that we get to do that, but we became just a bit more disciplined about things after that.
Right. I mean, just separating those things. I feel like it's sort of like that switch over from the point of view of being a freelancer, where it's like, what's the next gig, the next gig, the next gig, and you're just kind of scrambling from thing to thing, to pulling back and going like, all right, what's strategically, what do we need to be doing here in order to set ourselves up to not crash and burn at the end of this next project?
Yeah, see, I'd been a member of Young Irish Filmmakers, and that was a wonderful experience as a teenager in a sort of mend and make do and go for it kind of, you can do it kind of way. But then we need to sort of graduate from that sort of philosophy, because on Secret of Kells, obviously, we'd crashed and run out of money and everything. And so there was a graduation period where Enterprise Ireland, which is a national body for encouraging sort of startups, we were past the startup stage, but, you know, for that kind of thing, they came in and gave us a mentor and helped us make the transition. And the Irish Film Board, like, a lot of people were like delighted that we were getting Oscar nominated and winning prizes and stuff, and alarmed at how chaotic our business side of things was. And I mean, it wasn't all our fault. I do feel it was part of the industry at the time. Like, animation goes through cycles. And when we set up, unless you were in CG, there wasn't a whole lot of work. So we were kind of scrambling between projects. But I do remember after Secret of Kells, I started asking everybody I met, how do you do it? I was trying to figure out how people did it. And I remember even saying it to you when we went for lunch when you visited the studio, and you were like, well, I think you figured it out by now, Tom. It's like, oh, maybe we have actually. Somewhere along the way, we figured it out. But for years, I'd say for the first 10 years of the studio, I was always kind of had one part of my brain thinking, geez, maybe I need to get a real job. You know, maybe this is all gonna, you know, I'm gonna have to cash in this experience and get a real job, as it were, quote unquote, real job.
Yeah, no, I totally hear you. And that, I mean, that conversation is what we do here. Like, that's why I have the show, because then I have permission to ask everybody exactly that.
And that's why I love listening to it, because I used to ask that everybody I met. I remember meeting Bill Plimpton, like, how do you do it? Like, everybody was just trying to figure it out, you know?
Yeah. So what was that moment for you? Do you remember a moment when you're like, I'm not going to have to go, quote unquote, get a job? You knew that you would be employable in animation, but it would, I mean, it's just a completely different thing. I mean, you said a few minutes ago that the reason you're a producer on your own films is you don't want to lose control. You said that you are maybe a little control-y and you come in the morning and fix people's wolf's drawing, you know, like.
Maybe, yeah.
So
kind of, along those lines, I think I'm better now than I was, but yeah, I do.
Oh no, I mean, I'm teasing,
yeah.
but I understand, not in this kind of like, not in a pejorative way, but in a, we have a vision. I mean, you have a vision. You want to do 2D animation. You want it to be stuff that's rooted in your own, you know, history, experience, all these other kinds of things. And these are not standard issue films. You know, they're not cookie cutter in any dimension. And so you have to have that kind of control in order to make that stuff. The idea of you saying like, I'm going to go get a job as an animator someplace, storyboarder, whatever, whatever it would have been. And I know you were thinking about that in the first part of your career. So what was there a moment when you're like, nope, I work here. This is me. I do this.
Yeah. What happened was, Ross Stewart, who co-directed Wolfwalkers with me, had been the art director on Secret of Kells. And obviously, when we crashed, we had to shrink down to just like 10 people. And Ross had been contacted by Leica to do some production work for Paranorman. And I was like, oh, I'd love to be part of that too, because I loved what Leica were doing. I was a fan of Coraline. And Secret of Kells was kind of in its slow burn phase. It was picking up awards, but as I told you, we weren't, you know, we were scraping together a living doing commercials and making a short film and stuff. So we weren't really booming. And I was picking up that work with Ross doing production design. And then it was on the cards that I might go and work with Leica, for example. And they're lovely people, and I would have loved to have worked with them. But I remember Chris Butler, the director of Paranorman. I met him at the Annies after we'd been nominated for an Oscar. And I was like, geez, I don't know. And he goes, I think you do know. I think this means you got to make your another film. And it really felt in my heart like, yeah, you're right. And it wasn't just Chris. that trip to LA for the Annies, we'd just been surprise nominated for an Oscar, and so many people like Jim Capobianco and Pixar. I won't even try and name everybody. Brenda Chapman. So many friends in the industry said, "Look, you're living the dream. You're getting to make your own movies. This Oscar nomination is the industry telling you we'd like to see what you're doing, not come over here and help us make whatever we're doing." As much respect as I have for the craft in LA, it did seem like they all felt you'd be mad to chuck it in now that you just were nominated for an Oscar. So I really do think that that Oscar nomination was worth a whole lot. It was validation of what we'd spent our 20s building, and it was kind of a pat on the back and a reassurance that we should keep going despite the fact that we'd been bruised by some hard lessons along the way.
Because I bet they're all saying you're living the dream, and you're thinking,
yeah, you've got free pizza and the swimming pool and all the stuff the big studios have. Exactly. I do remember coming back from my first ever trip to LA. I won a Directors Finder Series award, and Secret of Kells wasn't even finished, but the DGA had this thing for young directors, and I think I wasn't even 30 at the time. And I went over and I got a tour of the studios, and I met all these agents and, the whole thing. And it was amazing because it was like a playground, like places like Pixar and Disney Studios, DreamWorks, etc. And then I came back and I was at my desk. I was jet lagged, and there was like pencil shavings around the floor. There was like 8 of us all on top of each other in a little office, and I was like, but it was all worth it.
So this is the dream, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So you keep saying, sort of referring to this period after you'd finished Secret of Kells and hadn't yet gotten this nomination, this sort of crash and burn period when things really were pretty rough. So do you feel like you made a mistake at any point there that you learned from, or was it just this is what's going to happen when you try to extend yourself to make a feature when you are just starting out, you don't have the full structure around you? I mean, what did you learn from that?
There's 2 things we did. We didn't have something else ready to feed the team. We just were barely finishing it because, as I said, we were laying track as we went. And Ross and Paul were amazing producers. Ross Murray and Paul Young, they did so much work pulling the finance together, but they were just like us. We'd all just been in college together. Ross and I had been young Irish filmmakers together. Paul had been in Ballyfermot at senior college, so none of us were business people really. Ross was much better at business and Paul was much better at business than me, but even still, we just didn't have those smarts, and if we brought those in while times were good, we might have rode out that storm. I say all that, and also there's factors beyond your control. I mean, it was 2009. That was after there was a crash. People had been betting on mortgages. There was stuff going on that was way beyond our control. And I remember taking meetings around the time that the Secret of Kells was finished, prior to being released and nominated for an Oscar in LA. I think it was that trip I was talking about. And there was a sense of everybody was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Everyone knew, the bubble that the world had been living in was going to affect Hollywood soon. It was going to hit at some point. So there was that kind of tension in the air as well. So some things are beyond your control and you can't really do much about it. And if it hadn't been the Celtic Tiger boom in Ireland, I don't think we would have been able to raise the amount of money we raised for Secret of Kells, But capitalism is fun, booms and busts all the time.
Roller coaster.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. It's like there's both the lesson that there are things you absolutely can't control and that are going to happen, and you have to figure out how to ride them out. And also that you can identify specific things you could have done, like having more managerial acumen, having more capacity maybe for
even as
so
a small
totally
studio. Yeah, even as a small studio, we built up a little business doing commercials, which I always hated. It always felt like using your powers for evil or something, doing commercials. And we did a lot of illustrations. We used to illustrate books. So we had a little tipping along studio for about 10 people. And we let all that go to focus on the feature and the TV show. So even that business was hard to pick up again because other people had taken that spot. And so we needed to go bigger, and that took longer. And that took some bravery on all our parts to kind of hold the line for a while and wait for the kind of delayed reaction to the fact that Secret of Kells had been nominated, Skunk Fu had done well, and you don't make money the day after it's released. You make it years later. It's a long, long tail, and even then, it's not like winning the lotto or anything. But it builds. You build a rights catalog, you build a reputation in the industry, and you get more and more trust, and more people want to work with you. So we just had to hold the line and do whatever paid the bills for another while. And some great stuff came out. That Oscar nomination meant that stuff like doing the little section of The Prophet for Salma Hayek came along, and Nora met Angelina Jolie, and all that kind of stuff started to happen, which bore fruit like 5 years later. But those kind of connections, we kind of had to stay in business to take advantage of them. Otherwise, we might have dispersed and just gotten quote unquote real jobs and never made another independent film anyway.
Do you enjoy the relationships and business piece of this now at all, or is it something that you're happy to hand over?
I love the human side of it, and I wouldn't want to let go of Paul is really been our main kind of, traveling salesman or whatever since we set up the studio. And Nora and I have been kind of the ones that stayed at home directing. And then over the last few years, as we built a business team around Jerry, like a head of finance and lawyers and all of that kind of stuff, I feel more and more comfortable meeting potential partners because I know that we have a team at home that are going to deal with that stuff, and I don't have to get into the stuff that I'm bad at, like negotiating or playing hardball or whatever the heck you do to kind of get to, because we weren't great at good contracts make good friends, but we weren't really good at contracts and stuff. We often seemed to kind of shoot ourselves in the foot. And maybe that was part of just getting started and you can't avoid it. But now I really enjoy when I arrived here in Paris, I went to a screening of The Summit of the Gods, which was produced by Didier Brunner. I really should mention Didier's role as another mentor in my career. We went to see that, and everybody in the cinema was like the French animation world. And I knew them all either tangentially or directly from working with them. And to me, they're friends, To me, they're an extended family. I'm really happy to meet them all, and I'd be really, really happy to initiate another co-production with any of them. But I don't have to do the business side. I don't have to negotiate the contracts or go
right. I mean, I think
the cash.
All the stuff you're saying in terms of not making the actual artwork, but making the company, making the structure in which the artwork can happen seems to be about identifying partners, building relationships, figuring out how to hire and how to structure a business around people's expertise.
Yeah. And I think that's something that, like, the hard skills I have, whatever they're worth, they were only a small part of it. I think building the company really was about those soft skills and making connections and finding trustworthy partners and people that, and what I wanted to say was, like, there's a whole other part to my story that I think, like, I kept a blog of Kells because I was so excited about everything I was learning and I wanted to share it with everyone. That's why I love what you're doing. And it's the kind of thing I want to let people know. So the big thing for me was discovering European co-production. And at whatever age I was, like 23 or 24, Didier Brunner, who was already a very established French producer, believed in what we were doing and took us on and sort of said our movie was his next movie. He was in the middle of Triplets of Belleville, and him doing that changed a lot. Even Irish funders took us more seriously because they said, okay, these aren't just a bunch of guys down in Young Irish Filmmakers buildings in Kilkenny. They're actually internationally recognized, and there's a serious producer in France willing to take a punt on them. And so from that point onwards, I think I learned a lot from working with Didier and all our co-producers, because they're all somewhere in their own journey. Like Didier was like 20 years ahead of me, but then some of our other partners were people who'd set up after they'd worked with us. And so there's a kind of European co-production model where we're all comparing notes and looking at how each other are doing. That's been a really important part of my career too. It's worth mentioning, I think, because you learn so much just from being honest and open with each other. This idea that, everyone's in competition and we don't tell each other what we're doing, I think is so counterproductive, because once the industry is doing well, it's good for all of us.
Yeah, I mean, in general, I feel like there's so many stories out there about the way creatives are supposed to work and the way we're supposed to make our careers work and how it's supposed to kind of magically happen and all this other kind of stuff. And we're reduced to running around having, sidebar conversations with people like, how do you do this? How are you making it? What's happening? Like, it shouldn't be that secret. It shouldn't be that hard to get this information.
I think it's also an education. I think, like, young people, they study to, like you talked about this, I think one of the other things I listened to, people study to do their craft, to get the hard skills, but nobody teaches them all the hustle and all the work it takes to make a living as an artist. And I mean, it's a miniature version of it. So many people who work with us they're kind of running their company of themselves, or their company of a little group that work together all the time. And then they work with us sometimes, and then they work with other people, and they come back, and they're kind of having to do a miniature version of what we had to do as a studio. Like there was a group of us, like me and Nora and Paul, and then an extended group of kind of friends and founders. What we were doing was looking for the next job as we finished up one job and discovering that you have to have the next one lined up. And that's exactly what so many of the artists we work with have to do. You know, if they come to the end of the contract, it's partly why we set up Lighthouse Studios. It's just to have another island for people to swim to in Kilkenny, because one of our challenges being in Kilkenny was we'd balloon up to scale so that we could do a bigger project. And then people would all be let go and they'd have moved to Kilkenny, or, you know, what if people had families and things like that. So we had to think about that there might, you know, other people were kind of going through that same cycle that we were going through as a company. You know?
Right. So they had to have someplace to go. Like they had to have someplace to have new work and keep their own little, you know, business economies going. Yeah.
You know what I love in France? They have this intermittence payment. Do you know about this?
Yes.
Yeah, it's so perfect.
Oh, the French.
No, they're so perfect. I mean, in Ireland, there's some really nice stuff. We don't pay income tax on like creative work, like writing a script or something, which is pretty amazing. But in France, it's next level. Yeah, it's next level.
Yeah. Although you do pay income tax on writing income in France. Yeah.
Yeah, but then it's worth it, because then you've got this intermittence time when you're in between projects. I think it's amazing. I really believe I'm a total lefty. Like I think higher tax and more social. I love the idea, like the Green Party in Ireland, and my wife is a member of the Green Party in Ireland, and they're really working on a universal basic income for artists. And I think the whole society should have a universal basic income. But if artists felt that their basic income was covered, the amount of amazing stuff that we generate as a society, it's like, even maybe, like, not to get too highfalutin, but we might solve some of the big problems that we're facing if people weren't worried about just making a living, you know, in order to get. But it's a bit utopian. It still doesn't exist outside of France and other enlightened countries.
Yeah, and even in France, I have to say, like, there's some major issues with that kind of basic income level stuff. I mean, having lived there. But yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, as an American, I can only gaze across the ocean in misty-eyed.
Yeah, but I suppose America has a lot of positives too, because it's like
for sure,
hub of creativity, and like so much of the stuff that inspires us comes out of America too, you know. And I always feel like amazed at artists in America who like go to college and get like a big debt and all, and then go into the business. Like it's such bravery, you know. There's so much.
Well, I mean, I think that there's something to be said there about the necessity is the mother of invention. When you're an artist and you do not have any social supports at all, like Americans don't, it's do or die. You know, it's kind of like you're talking about when you sign all the contracts with your production partners and everything's locked in for a film and you've got 24 months to finish the thing. You know, that energy is kind of, that's American energy. That's like, we have to do this. Like we have no choice, you know, and it's good and bad. You know, there's upsides to it, but it's also really complicated.
I love the positivity, like the amount of American artists I meet, and they're so positive, they're so upbeat about stuff, and they really want to give it a go, you know. Yeah, Europeans can be a bit more cynical.
It's true. It's weird, but it's very true. I wanted to ask you about one other thing that I know is going to be really interesting to our audience, and I haven't really heard you talk about it that much, but you've been a father throughout your entire professional life. Is that not true?
I'm a grandfather now, yeah.
You're a grandfather now, and you're quite a bit younger than me. I just want to get a sense of, so your son was born when you were in school still?
I was 18, so I was in my first year of animation school. Yeah, my wife was just starting art school as well. She took a year off. And we were teenage parents, so that kind of straightened us up. And I mean, you know, there's a huge amount of luck. We turned out to be incredibly compatible. You know, we're still together, 27 years later. We turned out to be really support for each other. But it's true, my wife, as an artist, had to put a lot of her own career stuff on hold until our son was about 16. She's only now like coming back into her own in the last 5 or 6 years, I suppose, really getting back out there again as an artist. She was teaching a lot, and a huge amount of those crazy times I talked about, the rent or the mortgage or whatever was paid by the fact that my wife was a teacher. But also I think having my son made me not flit about and go, oh, I'll just work in this studio and this studio. Maybe someday I'll set up my own studio. It kind of made me make some, I kind of committed early to a lot of stuff. And I see that, I see similar things to different people for whatever reason. It may not be becoming a parent, who knows what it is, but usually there's some external factor that makes people want to go the indie route and really go and stick with it. Sometimes it's, as you said, necessity can be the mother of invention. And for me, the opportunity to build my own company and build a life in my hometown was much preferable than having to emigrate and travel around and all when my son was very young.
I mean, being a parent anytime is hard. There's a lot of work involved in it. It changes your perspective on the world and those kinds of things. But also, you've had to balance this family life, and I know it's really important to you. I mean, your films are basically all about fathers and children, and like that's in there so deeply. And I love that you are seeing that this perhaps had played some part in your willingness to just throw everything into this.
Yeah, and also
do it.
There was a lot of the juice for stuff, like you said. I mean, especially say Song of the Sea. I mean, the main character was based on my son Ben. Like, it looked like him at the time. It took so long to make it. He was fully grown and leaving home by the time it was finished. But the initial idea was he was that kid, he was 10 years old. And I think for me, the movies I make, I usually pack them full of people I love or people that are very close to me, and that way I can live with them for so long, because it's a long journey. Like, once you commit to a movie, it's going to be maybe 5, maybe 6, maybe 7 years of your life until it's finished and over and in the rearview mirror. And even then, you have to stand beside it and either talk about it or whatever later. So, yeah, you have to pack it full of people you care about. So that's been one of my little tricks. Yeah,
I love that. I know you're deeply committed to your creative work, and yet when it comes time to make the thing, it's like you short circuit. Your inner critic comes roaring out and shuts you down. You find your attention dragged off by some other shiny new object. You can't stop feeling guilty and that you should be focusing on paid work. Your clients, your children, friends, boss, parents constantly demand your attention. Here's the thing, there is nothing wrong with you. There's just a breakdown somewhere in your creative engine, and you can repair it. I want to invite you to join me for the free Creative Engine Masterclass, where you'll learn which tactics will backfire when you're trying to get traction on self-generated creative projects and what to do instead. The 4 essential phases of the creative process you must implement to produce awesome work reliably, and you're probably skipping at least one. The good news hidden in your long history of valiant efforts to make your creative life work, how to diagnose what's off track and keep moving on your work, even when things get really challenging, and the secret to how to predict and avoid the pitfalls that derail you time and time again. This class is totally free, and you will get immediate, deep clarity into what makes your creative life tick and the specific next step to take to harness the power of your own creative engine. So stop procrastinating and start finishing your most important creative projects when you join the Creative Engine Masterclass at jessicaabel.com/engine. That's JESSICAABEL.com/engine. Okay, back to the show. So I read a quote from you someplace that said, I grew up thinking it would be terribly tragic if I stayed in Kilkenny my whole life. It's cute. Like, it's exactly what like a teenager would say, right? But so you're a teenager, you're in this, small city, and then you go off to art school in the big city, and then fatherhood happens, and then here you are back in Kilkenny.
Yeah.
I mean,
Kilkenny, I think making Secret of Kells, originally, it took way longer than I anticipated, but originally there was a part of me that felt big plan B. This is a great launch pad. Like, if we make something decent here with the support of young Irish filmmakers, which felt very much like home, that's where I'd met my wife, and that's where I'd spent all my teenage years. I was kind of one of the weird art kids. I wasn't into sports and stuff. And Kilkenny is the All-Ireland champion at hurling, and I went to a hurling school. And hurling is a Gaelic sport, and because I wasn't a hurler, I was so lucky there was young Irish filmmakers to hang out in, So yeah, it felt
hurling,
very,
animation,
Yeah, I love my favorite thing. My favorite thing is that the old seminary in Kieran's, which isn't, there's not enough people training anymore, the priesthood. Kilkenny, is what we ended up renting for Lighthouse Studios. So when we were installing all the Cintiqs and stuff, I was looking at the kids playing hurling, going, "Revenge of the Nerds." My old school, yeah. It's weird. It's a weird, cyclical, strange thing. I think stuff that was laid down, like our current president, Michael D. Higgins, I really think I owe my career to, in the way that I've met him once and shook his hand. But basically, in his career, before I was born, he'd set up things like the Irish Language TV channel, the Irish Film Board, the Section 481 tax relief. Like, the amount of things he put in place, his vision for the arts in Ireland meant that it was possible for me to have a career as an artist in Ireland. So and Mike Kelly setting up Young Irish Filmmakers, so that the town I was growing up in had a place where you could go and muck around with cameras and try and be a filmmaker as a teenager. So,
So Young Irish Filmmakers, is that like a club?
Yeah,
what is that?
a club. It was like an organization, and it continues. Like a little after school filmmaking place. And they had, like, in the 90s, I always say this, in the 90s, it was the place to go to get your hands on equipment. So I wanted to animate with the Amiga they had. And I wanted to use the Genlock and the stuff they had in 90s top of the range stuff. But actually, I always say this, none of that mattered. The equipment keeps on changing. And now kids can make movies with their phones. But what we learned was collaboration. What we learned was that if we came together on a Saturday, at the end of the day, we had something much better than we would have done if we'd stayed at home in our bedrooms trying to make something. And I think that's the main thing that I took from filmmakers.
You learned relationships.
Yeah.
Like that seems to be, collaboration and building, these kinds of durable professional relationships that have been just, key to your whole career. Yeah.
And Ross Stewart and I mean, it's funny, like, we looked at each other several times during the production of Wolfwalkers, going, when we were sitting beside each other in school, trying to outdraw Batman. I can draw a better Batman than you, when we were like 11 and 12. And then in Young Irish Filmmakers, and we joined filmmakers equally to make movies and meet girls, because we'd been to an all-boys school. We were in our 40s and we were there making a feature film together. So yeah, it's been an amazing lineage. Like, I don't know, someone used the word like kismet or something, that, we all met each other as teenagers. We're like one of those bands like U2 or something. They're still rocking.
Yeah. I read an amazing article, I want to say in the New York Times a couple of years ago, that was about scenes and how relationships between artists are one of the most powerful predictors of success ever, like, of anything, and you could, it was a sort of modernist chart, and it was like, who's connected to who and how do they know each other. It was very cool. I believe that. I really do believe that.
I always think that's super interesting too.
So I have two questions for you, basically about work-life balance. How do you prioritize time for your family? What do you try to keep in mind to try to balance these different parts of your life? Obviously, as we've gone through, there are different phases where I'm sure it's easier and harder depending on where you are in production. But what do you have as a principle around that?
I've tried to get better. I think I was bad at it. I discovered very lately that some of the stuff that was my so-called superpower was actually an OCD diagnosis, and I regret some of that stuff. Like, I remember kind of willing my son to sleep at night, reading him a story so I could get back to the animation desk or whatever. And I remember many times feeling like I'd overcommitted. I had to go to a festival. I remember being in Cannes and missing like his 4th birthday and feeling like, what am I doing? I'm losing the balance, And I think it was part of being so young and trying to get the priorities balanced up. And again, thankfully, my wife was there to kind of catch when I dropped the ball a bit. Over the years, I've learned about work-life balance, and that's why I kind of scheduled this sabbatical for myself after Wolfwalkers. I knew I couldn't just keep rolling from one into another, and I needed a bit of time to recharge, or to let the field be kind of fallow, so that you can see what happens next. Otherwise, I think you just burn yourself out. And then I do think I've burnt out and worked through burnout a few times in my career when I look back on it. And it's only the blessing of it being such a collaborative medium that I got carried by some of my talented collaborators during those periods, So yeah, one of the most inspiring things for me about the younger generation as they come into the studio is how emotionally intelligent they are and how wise they are to the nonsense of being defined by your work, or feeling that working hard was somehow virtuous, or sleeping in the studio overnight because you worked so hard was something to be proud of rather than ashamed of. Like, basically, it's a failure of management, either personal management or management as a company, if people have to like burn themselves out to make something. There's absolutely no good reason that great art can't be achieved and have a good work-life balance. And I think honestly, my preference will be a work-life balance rather than a great movie. But that's old man maturity, I suppose.
Yeah, I don't know that you'd convince 22-year-old self that is the case.
Like, my heroes were people like Miyazaki and Dick Williams, who were like almost puritanically self-flagellating animators, always saying they weren't working hard enough, and they were so hard on themselves. They were famously really hard on their team, and whatever Catholic post-colonial nonsense was in my brain, I longed to be on their team for them to tell me I wasn't good enough and I had to work harder and all that stuff. So it's really strange when I look back on that whole culture where artists sort of self-flagellated and made themselves miserable as some kind of sign of being a great artist. It's crazy, really.
Yeah, totally agreed. What did burnout look like for you, and how did you come back?
I think because because my artwork, like, my wife says I'm a nicer person when I draw a few hours per day. And I'm hoping after 6 months drawing every day, I'm going to be a saint. But basically, the drawing wasn't. There was times when I felt very burnt out with the business, with the pressure, the weight. I kind of had this. I think, as becoming a father young as well, I had this kind of paternal feeling about the business, and I sort of was kind of called responsibility OCD by a therapist, where I felt I was responsible for everybody, and it was too much. Yeah, it was classic embarrassing mental health stuff, like crying in the toilet and pulling myself together and walking into a meeting. And it's only that I'm on the other side of it and I got help that I can see how crazy that was, but that went on for a long time.
Yeah. Okay, so with that in mind, what's your advice to young animators?
Yeah, watch out for that. Don't
imagine if that's happening, it's red flag.
Yeah, well, what was huge for me around mental health was one of our animation supervisors was just so open about his own journey. And then he spoke about that, and then other people in the room spoke about it. And I was like, oh, we can talk about this. We don't have to be. And I think it's a real service to talk about. And I mean, I'm mortified talking about it now, but I also think it's important that we talk about it. So I do think communicate with your colleagues and talk about your experience, because I got so much value from that. And the other thing is the tribe. Find your tribe. Like, if you're starting out, everybody's drawing. Most animators are in their bedroom a lot drawing, but try and find your tribe. Try and find the people. Maybe it doesn't even have to be in real life. Maybe it can be online, but try and find the people that will kind of encourage you and spur you on, and people that you can work with that will, either help you in your individual journey, or that maybe you can team up and do something together that's bigger than any one of you could do on your own. Because I do think there's real strength in numbers that way.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, that is something I really see playing out in our community in the Autonomous Creative Collective, is that just the energy of everybody jumping in and trying to help somebody when they're in a crisis point. It's really amazing and so powerful. Okay, so how do you balance the needs of the story versus the needs of the budget? Do you find budget and time constraints valuable in distilling a story down to its most important elements?
Yeah, I have one of the editors got a frame thing that Richie Cody, one of the editors on Wolfwalkers, did. He said, so much of making a movie is trying to make as little movie as possible. And it's really like that, and I think that there's something like a haiku about a feature film. It's very small, it's very tight structure, not so there's not a lot of room to be too elaborate in different directions. You have to really pare down. And then when you have a tight budget, for me, we always try to make a virtue of the budget limitations and schedule limitations, and try to find a style that worked within that budget, rather than trying to go like full Disney animation and then just looking like a cheap version of Disney when you couldn't, achieve that. So try to kind of design good solutions. I think design has been a big part of my career, and it's like designing solutions to budget problems and designing beautiful ways to make stylized animation look rich enough to justify a big screen experience without having hundreds of millions to spend on it. So
Yeah, I think this whole thing of, it's sort of going back to first principles in some ways, saying like, okay, well, what we could do is just chop off all of these features from something that's being done at a higher budget and say, we're not going to do those features. And so it's going to be a cheap version of the thing. Or you say, okay, well, what could we invent that's going to
yeah.
do the job?
Yeah, I remember Nora DDA again was really strong like that because he had the experience of European co-production that we didn't have. We'd grown up kind of dreaming of being like, American style animators or whatever. And so I always loved Eastern European animation, and I ended up learning a lot by working with Kecskemét Film Studio in Hungary and with DDA here in Paris and the team here in Paris. And I learned a lot about how I can't remember how DDA put it, but it was something like you have to be efficient, but that doesn't mean it can't be beautiful. Whereas I actually started to see a lot of the animation that I admired as a kid as a bit superfluous, like doing too much, like too many bells and whistles that weren't really adding to the story. Whereas we really learned to use visual language to our advantage and try and art direct our way and storyboard our way to making the story compelling before we'd even started animating. And then everything after that was kind of bonus.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so I'm going to get one last question in here from Owen, who says, I want to go into directing. What must I do to build up my skills for the role, and how did you do it?
To be a director, I think being a director is a lot about communication and a lot about, I think you need to build a certain confidence to be a director as well. You have to sort of feel like, yeah, I'm really sure of what I'm going to do. Not that you're right, but sometimes a decision is better than no decision. Like an indecisive director is the worst thing. You don't want that. So you kind of have to build your confidence in that, whether that's making shorts, whether that's doing your own work. You kind of have to build a point that that your voice is going to work. Like what you want to say is going to work. It's going to communicate what you're trying to say. And I think you have to have something to say. I think that's maybe the most important thing for a director, not to just want to make a cartoon or want to make a comic or whatever, just to make one, just because you'd love to do that, but actually have something to say. And that's a bit of self-work. That's a little bit of inner work that you have to do, whether that's meditating or journaling or whatever. Look at what you have to offer the world. And then once you're clear on that, then you can kind of communicate that, I hope.
But you can't have, maybe you can have been, but were you that confident when you started, or was it a matter of doing the thing and saying, I'm just going to try this, and I guess it kind of worked, now I'm going to do this, and that's okay, now I feel like I can make these decisions? Was there a process that you went through?
I was definitely terrified. I was really lucky to have Nora, who was really strong on story and really confident on story beside me during Secret of Kells, and of course Fabrice, who brought all that script writing chops to it. Where I was confident was on the art direction and animation side, because we'd had a studio for 5 years and we'd gone, we'd made commercials, we'd made short films, we'd made parts of other people's features. So I felt pretty confident on that side. And I had done a lot of work, a lot of development work. We'd spent a long, long time. We didn't have money, but we were kind of rich in time. So we'd spent a lot of time honing the look and how we wanted to do it and everything. So I was pretty clear on that. And Ross and I did a lot of scene illustrations to show the co-production studios how we wanted it done. And Barry Reynolds and the rest of the team on the characters did huge model packs where we really figured out we over designed and over prepared on the art direction side, and I felt strong there. Story terrified, really relied on collaborators. Voice direction terrified. There was plenty of stuff that it took feeling the fear and doing it anyway to get more confident, and I'd still not as super confident in those areas as I've always been around the art side.
Got it. Okay, well, that was amazing. That was so great. Thank you so much for being here and sharing all this history with us and all of your insights on your career. How can people find out more?
I think the best thing is to follow the Cartoon Saloon stuff. If you follow me on social media, you'll just see lots of vegan ranting and life drawings.
Well, and cute granddaughter.
Yeah, and photos of my granddaughter. Yeah, but I just post my personal art on social media, so I'm not sure how interesting that is for people. But in terms of the studio, follow the Cartoon Saloon, website and Twitter and Instagram and everything. Yeah, and watch out for Wolfwalkers.
I felt super lucky to be able to see it early on, although I can't wait to see it in a theater one of these days.
Yeah, man, I went to see Dune last night in the cinema, and I just was like, it was an enthusiastic audience. It was a packed cinema. It was a huge screen, and I was like, oh yeah, I've been missing this. You know, as good as having a home projector and everything is, yeah, I've been missing
Yeah,
it.
it's a whole other thing. Tom, thank you so much for being here. I am really excited, and I hope we can do this again sometime soon.
Yeah, really enjoyed it. Nice to chat to you again.
Thank you so much for joining us today for The Autonomous Creative. Our show is produced by Matt Madden. Our production coordinator is Lucina Boyhandian, and our production assistant is Rhiannon Sunday. Music is by Matt Madden, and I'm your host, Jessica Abel. You can find all our takeaways as well as any links and extras we mentioned today, plus transcripts, in the show notes. Find everything you need at acpod.show. If you enjoyed this episode, I hope you'll subscribe, and it would help us immensely if you would take a second and pop over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and review. It just takes a few seconds, but it's actually a huge help to us and to our guests to get this podcast suggested to new listeners. We appreciate your help so much, and we'll see you next time on The Autonomous Creative.